How's it going? John Connon here from Neural DSP, and today we're diving deep into the Fortin Nameless Suite X. This is a free update for users who already own our hugely popular Fortin Nameless Suite plugin, and is made in collaboration with the legendary amp designer Mike Fortin of Fortin Amps. Based on the Fortin Meshuggah signature amplifier, this plugin meticulously captures the signature sound of Fortin amps, giving you access to insane amounts of gain, perfect for crushing rhythm parts and searing leads. This update also includes a reworked user interface, new devices, and several quality of life improvements. In this video, we'll explore the amp, effects, and features that make this such an exciting update. I'll show you how I dial in some of my favorite tones and help you get the most out of this plugin in your own playing. Before we explore the Fortin Nameless Suite X, let's first take a moment to talk about the man behind the amplifier and his legendary designs. Mike Fortin is a renowned amp designer who has worked with some of the biggest names in heavy music, including Meshuggah, Whitechapel, and Architects. His designs are known for their uncompromising high-gain tones, exceptional clarity, and tight low-end response. The Fortin Meshuggah amplifier is a 50-watt, single-channel, all-tube high-gain monster that offers the brutality, tightness, and aggression that modern metal guitarists are looking for. Now, with the Fortin Nameless Suite X, we are proud to bring you all of that power and flexibility, combined with the convenience and accessibility of a plugin, along with some highly versatile pre- and post effects. So, let's dive in. So when you open up the plugin for the first time, you'll be greeted with this amplifier page where you can see the amplifier as well as a few global features here up top, as well as the preset selection menu. At the top left, you'll see we have the pre-effects where we've got a few pedals before the amplifier. On the second page is the amplifier page that we were just on. After that, we then have the cab page, and this is where you can tweak the impulse responses and affect the cabinet sound. After this, we then have the EQ, where you've got the 9-band graphic EQ with high and low pass filters. And finally, at the end of the chain, at the far right, you'll see we have the post effects where we've got a delay and reverb device. And having these laid out in this way makes it really easy and intuitive to get to any part of the signal chain and dial in your sound. So let's start at the foundation of our guitar sound, which is the amplifier. As you can see, the design here has stayed true to the original model. And going from left to right, we have the light that indicates the amplifier is on. However, you can bypass it using these switches here, and they both together will turn on and off the amplifier. Next to this, we then have the master volume control dial here, shown by MVC. And currently, this is at 5, and this is how the default preset sounds. And this master volume will obviously turn the master volume of the amplifier up or down. There's an additional feature on this master volume control, and you'll see underneath it says pull gain. So if you click this, you'll see the actual dial gets a bit larger because we've now pulled it out, just as is the case with the original model. And this adds an additional gain stage to the preamp, resulting in higher gain sounds. So again, I'll just put it in for the time being, and this is how it sounds without that push-pull. And this is how it sounds with the pull gain engaged. Due to this extra gain stage, what this is doing is essentially adding gain and compression to our original sound, so we're going to get that extra bit of oomph and distortion from the amplifier. And you may notice a small drop in volume as well, but this is just down to the compression that's being added. So I'm going to set that back in for the time being and move on to the presence dial. Like the presence dials on most amplifiers, this will be a nice control for the very upper top end. So dialing this in towards 10 will give a bit more brightness and pick attack. Currently, it's set at 2, and it sounds like this. If I bring this in, say towards about 7, Or we could crank this all the way and get a very aggressive, bright top end sound. Next, let's move on to the bass dial. So let's reset presence. And you'll see here bass is currently at 7. This is allowing a nice low end to come in and make it nice and punchy and thick. We could bring this back. Maybe if you've got a lower tuned guitar and you want to clean up that low end a bit, this would be great for that. So now it's at about 2. Or, like I said, we could bring this in and allow that low end to really come through and make the sound nice and thick. Next to this, we then have the middle dial. So this is a really powerful control to emphasize how much mid-range you want. And if we bring it all the way back and scoop it, we're going to lose a lot of that. So this is how it sounds with middle at 0. You'll hear it sounding very hollow now. So let's bring some mids back in, put them around 7 or 8. As you can hear, this is a very powerful control. It's altered the character quite a bit. Let's put it all the way at 10. And there we've got the most note definition so far. So let's bring this back. Let's move on to treble. So again, similar to presence, treble is going to be a high-end control, not the very upper top like presence is. This is going to be a bit more of a high-mid control. So let's bring this back and we'll have a warmer, more rolled-off sound. Let's push it to around 7 or 8 again. And there we've got that high-mid kind of snarl coming in. Let's push it all the way, just see how aggressive it gets. And now let's move on to the 2 gain controls. You'll see we've got gain 1 and gain 2 here, and this is due to the fact that we have 2 inputs. We've got a low and a high input. And as you see there, as I go firstly into the low input, gain 1 is grayed out. And that's because you can only access the gain in gain 2 when you're in the low input. It's dimed all the way at 10, and here's how it sounds. We could bring this back and get more kind of rock crunch tones. Now it's around 4. And we can clean this right up if we want and get more kind of lo-fi intro kind of sounds. So now let's move on to the high input. I'm going to bring the gain 2 all the way up to 10, and then selecting the high input, we've now got access to gain 1. So if I have this at around 1, we're going to have that extra amount of gain from gain 1 coming in. So here's how that sounds. You'll hear there it kind of feels like it's suppressing it a bit, so let's bring in gain 1 a bit more to around 5, and we're going to have that extra gain stage adding a bit more oomph. And now let's push this all the way because we totally can. So now we've got gain 1 and 2 both at 10. So setting them both at 10 is one way to get a sound, but I'd recommend using them in combination to independently dial in separate amounts of gain, and there you could get a wide variety of different kinds of gain sounds. So what I'm going to do now is play around with both of them independently so you can hear the different sounds that they can give. Of course, there's a lot of gain on tap here, especially when they're both at 10, but we mentioned earlier there's a pull gain feature. So let's now engage that. So now that's engaged, we have access to that further gain stage and we can get some real high gain sounds. Here's how it sounds, again, with gain 1 and 2 all the way at 10, and currently we have the pull gain set at around 5. We can, of course, then push the pull gain a bit. Let's now go to 8. And again, just because we can, let's push it all the way to 10 as well. And this is naturally going to bring a bit more level in. So what I'm going to do is just attenuate the master volume output of the plugin to around -5 dB, just so we don't clip. So from what seems like a very simple amplifier, when looking at it on the surface, you can actually get a large amount of sounds from both the EQ section, which is really powerful at shaping the character of your sound, but also all these various gain stages. And having control over all these parameters and gain stages means that you can really tailor the sound to you. Now let's take a look at some of the pre-effects in the Fortin Nameless Suite X. We start off at the far left with the Zool gate. And this is a very simple pedal. We've just got 2 controls. The first one being the dial where you set the threshold of the noise gate, and then also the bypass foot switch to enable the gate. And in short, as you turn this dial from left to right, it's going to tighten that gate a bit more and cut more of the noise out. So let's first start with it all the way to the left. As we increase this, it's going to tighten those gaps and really cut all of the extraneous noise out that we don't want. Now let's hear it at its most extreme setting, all the way up. And you can hear, even at its most extreme setting, it's not choking the sound too much or getting in the way of any definition. So now let's move on to the hex drive. I'm just going to reset that gate there to noon. And the hex drive is a great overdrive for pushing the amp a bit harder. It's ideal for both classic kind of rock sounds, as well as the more aggressive higher gain metal tones as well. Without the hex drive engaged, here's how my guitar sounds. Now let's engage the hex drive with those current settings. You'll be able to hear there, it's done that classic trick of an overdrive in front of a high gain amp. It's really rounded off that low end and taken some of that extreme low out, so we've got a nice tight bottom end now. We've got 3 controls on this device. We have a drive to increase the amount of saturation applied with this, and as well as that, we've got a tone. So this is going to go from darker to brighter as you move it round clockwise. And finally, we've got level. So this is going to be an overall output control for the pedal. So if you wanted to drive the amp harder, you can crank that all the way and push more signal into the front of the amp. With everything set at noon, here's how the pedal sounds. We could bring the gain back a bit, so let's take the drive back. Or alternatively, we could push it. Let's see how much is on tap from the pedal. I'm now going to set the drive to around noon. And with the tone, let's bring this back and really warm up the sound of our guitar before it hits the amplifier. Now let's make it a lot brighter and push the tone on this hex drive almost all the way up. I'm just going to reset this tone to noon, and now let's play around with the level. So now I'm going to bring the level back, and we can experiment with feeding the amp various levels of signal. So with the level at around 9 o'clock, we're going to have less gain. Now let's drive it a bit harder, 3/4, almost all the way up, and drive that amp a bit harder, get more distortion out of it. So now we're getting into more lead territory with the amounts of gain going on. So this is a really flexible device, both for aggressive rhythm sounds and then going into the lead territory as well. Now let's bypass this device and move on to the final device in the pre-effects, the Fortin grind pedal. Here's how it sounds without the grind pedal engaged. And now if I engage the grind pedal with the dial set at noon, here's how it sounds. You'll be able to hear it's immediately added a load of aggression and clarity to the top end, emphasized that pick attack and made the transients a bit more aggressive. So we could dial this back a bit. And that's tightened it up a bit. It's brought down the gain as well. So let's push it the other way and really emphasize this effect. We'll drive the amp a bit harder, get even more aggressive as well. Just for reference, here's how the tone sounded without the Fortin grind engaged. And here's with. So as you can hear, it's a really great device for dialing in that articulate high gain rhythm sound. That sums it up for the pre-effects section, but now let's hear all 3 of these devices in combination together. As you can hear, these pre-effects are not only great utility and tone shaping tools, but they also complement the amplifier so you can really dial in the perfect sound. Now let's have a look at the cab page of the Fortin Nameless Suite X. Here we have studio level control over our microphones and microphone placement. And at any time, you can have up to 2 microphones active, as you can see on the cabinet, And you've got independent controls on the left and right of the UI. And this allows us to really experiment with different microphones and placements to really dial in our sound. For now, I'm just going to bypass the microphone and impulse response section on the right and go through all of the controls on the left. So currently, the guitar sounds like this. Another moment, we have a dynamic 57 position here on the speaker cone. We can easily cycle through various microphone models with these left and right arrows. So let's try dynamic 421. Maybe a condenser 184. Or maybe a ribbon 160. You can see the list of available microphone models by selecting this drop-down menu, and you'll see that we have a choice of 3 dynamic microphones, 1 condenser, and 2 ribbon microphones. You also have the option of loading in your own custom impulse response here if you wish as well. For now, I'm just going to stay on a dynamic 57. Below this, you'll see we have 4 different dials relating to this microphone's parameters. The first dial is for position, and as I move this, you'll see on the cabinet, the mic will move accordingly. Alternatively, you could just drag the microphone by clicking it and moving it to the position you want. Let's start with it right on top of the speaker cone, and this will be a nice, bright, very articulate sound. As we pull this toward the outside of the cone, it's going to get slightly darker. Let's put it right on the outside of the cone. Now let's move on. I'm going to reset that position to just outside the center of the cone. Next to that, we then have a distance parameter. So again, as I move that dial, the microphone will get further away from the cabinet the higher the value. With the microphone right up against the speaker at 0.000, it sounds like this. Let's put it halfway out. You'll hear immediately we have a different EQ character just by doing that. Let's push it all the way out. And now quite a lot of the low end's gone, the mids have changed especially. So let's reset that by double clicking it, and now it's just away from the cabinet a tiny bit. Below this, on the left, we have an independent mic level for this microphone. So when you mix them, which we'll do in a bit, you can vary the levels to get the perfect sweet spot of the two. And next to that, we also have a pan control. So when you're using either 1 or 2 microphones, you can pan them in the stereo field, whichever way you want. Below this, we then have an option to toggle on a room send. And this sends the signal to an emulation of a room. So you can have that ambient in the room amp sound as well. Currently, it's set to -6 dB, and here's how it sounds. So now it kind of sounds like we're in the room with the amplifier. You may want to have this as a more subtle effect. Let's bring this down a bit to around -12. Or you may want this to be really exaggerated. So let's bring it to around 0 dB. Or, of course, you can bypass it completely with the toggle switch. Below this, we have an option to invert the phase of this particular microphone or impulse response. And this is a very common necessity when working with 2 microphones or impulse responses. Now I'm going to engage the other impulse response and microphone selection and mix and match a few different models. So currently it's set to a condenser 184. I'm going to bypass my original 57. So here's how that condenser 184 sounds. Now I'm going to bring in this 57, and you'll have a direct blend of the two 50-50 because they're both at 0 dB. Just as a comparison, here was just the 57. Now with the condenser. Of course, now you've got a bit more level, but there's that mid-range that's come in from the condenser microphone, and they're filling in each other's gaps in the frequency spectrum. Let's try a different microphone. On this second choice, let's go for a ribbon 160. Let's maybe go 421. Maybe we could play around with the positions of these. Let's have this dynamic further out towards the outside of this second speaker, and maybe this 57 right over the cone, and the distance right up close to it. And let's bring this dynamic further out. Let's see how it sounds. And with these same altered positions, let's maybe try the dynamic 906. And it's a really great feature having these set parameters of distance and position and still being able to audition various microphone models by cycling through them. And finally, as we have two microphones, let's pan them. Let's go hard left on the dynamic 57 and hard right on the dynamic 906. The end result of this will be a nice stereo image with an impulse response and microphone in either ear. And maybe you just want to add a few subtle tweaks to the amplifier. You can still totally do that. Let's bring back the bass on the amplifier just by selecting that dial, and it works in the same way as if you were on the main amp page. Now we've moved on to the EQ page of this plugin, and this is a brand new addition to this X version of the Fortin Nameless Suite. And let's hear what it can do. At the far left, we have a bypass toggle switch if you want to bypass or engage it, and also a high pass filter where you can roll off some of the low end, and at the far right, a low pass filter where you can roll off the high end. In between those two filters, we have independent faders for a specific frequency band where you can either boost or cut a selected frequency range. Say, for instance, you wanted to clean up the low end of your high gain rhythm sound. We can do that simply with a high pass control. So currently, my guitar sounds like this. And maybe that low end's getting a bit muddy in a mix. I could use this high pass filter to roll off around 100 Hertz. We've used that high pass filter there to get rid of that super low end. Again, without the EQ. And with. Alternatively, you may think there's too much top end in the sound. Let's use the low pass filter to cut to around 6 kilohertz. If I bypass this, you'll hear that high frequency information come back in. And with the EQ engaged. It's just a bit softer and rolled off on the top end. You could use the frequency bands as corrective EQ. Maybe you want to get rid of that annoying high mid stuff that builds up, especially with high gain sounds. So let's duck out 2, 4, and 8K a bit. If I bypass this, that will come back in with the EQ. And you'll notice that's an audible difference, and I've barely moved these faders. So it's worth noting that these are very powerful and can cut or boost up to minus or plus 12 decibels. Alternatively, you could use this in an artistic and creative way. Maybe you want to go for a lo-fi guitar sound like a megaphone. So let's really narrow the extremities and almost create a mid-focused lo-fi guitar sound. I actually want to cut a bit more of the lows, so I'm just going to use this high-pass filter and simply roll off even more. And again, without. And with. As you can hear, this EQ device can be used for purposes like simple corrective EQ all the way to artistic, drastic EQ moves. And this is a great tone shaping tool to have at this stage of the signal chain. Now we're on to the post effects of the Fortin Nameless Suite X, and we have two devices. The first one is a delay, and the second is a reverb. Starting at the delay, this is a digital delay, and we've got a few parameters to go through. So, currently, with all of the parameters set as they are by default, here's how it sounds. Starting off at the top left, we've got the mix, and this will be a blend between your dry and wet signals. So with mix all the way to the left, you'll just hear your dry guitar. And no delay signal. However, as we increase this, we'll get a bit more of that blended delay in. So it was originally around 50%. We could have a more subtle delay. That's around 25–30%. Or we could have a really obvious and vivid delay sound by increasing this over 50%. So now we're going to hear more delay than our dry guitar. Next up, we have the time parameters. And there are two controls that relate to this. We have, of course, the time dial, but above that, you'll see a sync toggle switch. This has three modes for the delay. At its far left, we are in free mode. So you can set the time in milliseconds as shown on the digital delay screen. And this is independent of the tempo clock on the plugin or in your DAW, if you're using it in a DAW. We just have the delays repeating at the set millisecond value. And this is affected by the time dial. So currently at 500 milliseconds, the delay sounds like this. We can increase this to longer delay intervals or shorten it right down and get more slapback style delay effects. Next to this, in mode 2, the center mode, we have app mode, or if you're using this in a DAW, this would say DAW. And this means that the tempo clock of the delay is going to relate to the tempo of either the app in standalone, in this case it's 120 beats per minute, or the BPM of your DAW session. And then the time dial will determine the subdivision at which the delays repeat, going anywhere from a dotted whole note all the way to a 64th triplet. And then the final mode is tap mode. So now we can determine the clock of the delay device with the tap tempo foot switch. So now we're still in divisions, but now the time set by the BPM is tapped rather than set in the app or DAW. So currently the delay is set to a dotted quarter note at my tapped tempo, and here's how it sounds. If this is too long, We could shorten this by going for maybe an eighth note triplet. And you'll hear there we've got more delay repeats occurring at shorter intervals. Next, up here we have a ping pong switch, and this has currently been on. This determines whether the delay repeats go left and right as they repeat. So with it off, all of the delay repeats are going to be dead center and there'll be no stereo spread to them. Here's how it sounds. However, if I turn ping pong mode on, you'll now hear the delay repeats go left and right. Below this, we then have a tone dial, and this refers to the tone of the delay repeats, not your dry guitar signal. With the tone dial to the left, your delay repeats are going to sound darker, and to the right, they're going to be brighter. So with them to the left, we're going to have warmer, more rolled off sounding delay repeats. With this dial to the right, they're going to be a lot brighter and thinner sounding. Next, we then have the feedback dial. And in simple terms, this is going to be the amount of delay repeats. With it to the left, we'll have a shorter number, and to the right, we'll have a lot more. So, with feedback just below its minimum value, we'll have a couple of repeats. As we increase this, we'll have a couple more. And with feedback to the right, we're going to have a lot more for those lush, ambient, drawn-out soundscape type guitar sounds. Now you can hear that this delay device adds a whole new dimension of sounds that we can add to our guitar tone. Moving on, let's bypass the delay with the bypass foot switch and move on to the reverb device. Before I engage the reverb, here's how my dry guitar sounds. And with the default settings, here's how the reverb sounds. The first dial on the reverb device is the mix. Similar to the delay, this will be a blend between your dry and wet guitar signals. So with it all the way to the left, we'll hear no reverb. And as you increase this, you'll get a bit more of that reverb blended in. So this is just below midday. And this is great for making guitar sounds feel a bit less claustrophobic and putting them in a space. If we increase this, we'll have a much more obvious and vivid, wet, roomy sound. Putting the reverb mix at around midday, let's move on to the tone dial. Again, similar to the delay device, this will make the reverb tail darker or brighter, depending on where the dial's set. With the tone set to the left, we'll have a nice warm reverb tail. As we increase this, the reverb tail will sound thinner and a lot brighter. Setting the tone to midday, let's move on to the decay dial. And this will be a control of how long the reverb tail is. So with it to the left, we're going to have a much shorter, smaller sounding space. And this is great for more busier parts where you don't want the reverb to be just clouding everything in a big old tail. So we can then increase this if we had more drawn out, ambient, soundscapey type guitar parts, and this will have a nice long tail to it, and it's perfect for that. And of course, if you wanted to bypass it or engage it, we have another bypass foot switch there. So that covers it for the post effects section. These two devices work really well in combination with each other. And this is a great final stage to add dimension to your rhythm sounds as well as long ambience to leads and other guitar layers. Now let's take a look at some of the global features of the Fortin Nameless Suite X. Starting at the top left, we have our input gain dial, and this can be used to either increase or decrease your gain going into the plugin. If your signal is maybe a bit weak, maybe you're using low output pickups, you could increase this and make sure you've got a healthy level of signal. Currently, with the input set at 0.0 dB, my signal is going to be about 3/4 of the way up. And that's a healthy level of signal and we're not clipping. If we were clipping, we could just dial this back and attenuate it. If you do clip, you'll see a red light appear at the top of the meter. Next to this, we then have a noise gate, and this can be toggled on or off with the toggle switch. And by default, it's set at -80 decibels. And this is going to be another additional gate on top of the gate in the pre-effects to really tighten up your guitar signal. So with it set at -80 decibels, it sounds like this. If I increase the threshold of this gate, it's going to choke the guitar a bit more. And finding the sweet spot of this is important because you don't want it to choke up the guitar too much. So setting this where it takes off all of the extraneous noise and keeps your guitar nice and tight and clean is important. Next to this, we then have a transpose dial, and this can be used to increase or decrease your guitar's pitch by 12 semitones or anything in between. Currently, I'm using a baritone tuned guitar, so I'm in B standard at the moment. Using the transpose dial, I can bring this down 1 semitone, and now I'm in B flat standard. I could drop this even further. Let's go down, say, 6 semitones. Alternatively, I could increase the pitch and set it 3 semitones above my actual guitar's pitch. So a really useful tool to change the pitch and tuning of your guitar on the fly. Next to transpose, we then have the input mode selection. Currently, we are using the guitar, and this is a mono input source, so we've set it to mono. However, if your audio interface has 2 inputs and you're running a stereo input, then you can select stereo using the toggle switch, and the plugin will process a stereo input source. Next to this, we then have the preset selection screen. Here you'll see 2 arrows, left and right, and using these, we can scroll through all of the presets included in the plugin. Below that, we then have the drop-down menu, where you can select the default preset of the plugin, as well as artist presets in various folders, and also Neural DSP factory presets. Above this, we have a few different options to save presets. So maybe if I created my own preset with custom settings, an asterisk would appear. I can then save this preset, whatever I want. Select save. And now in the drop-down menu, you'll see we have a user folder with the preset that I just customized and saved. If we made any changes to this, an asterisk will appear, and we can then save and overwrite that preset. Or alternatively, if we wanted to, we can delete it as well. The 3 dots next to this allows you to import a preset from elsewhere on your computer, or reset the current preset if you've made changes to it, as well as locate a file and load that into the plugin. Next to the preset selection area, we have the doubler. And the doubler is great for imitating that double-tracked wide stereo image guitar sound, all with one guitar. So currently the doubler is bypassed and my guitar sounds like this. I'm going to engage the doubler with a toggle switch. And currently it's set to 6 milliseconds, so one of the sides is delayed by 6 milliseconds, giving that stereo spread. By increasing this millisecond value, we're going to have a more obvious and larger sounding doubler effect because that delay is going to be greater. So now it's at 15 milliseconds and it sounds like this. And this can go all the way up to 20 milliseconds if we want. At the top right of the window, you'll see we have the master output dial for the plugin. This can be used to either increase or decrease the output of the plugin, maybe to prevent clipping or to increase the output in a DAW. The master output setting can be saved to specific presets. Currently, in this default preset, it's set to 0.79, and the signal is about 3/4 of the way up. Again, this is a healthier level, we're not clipping, and similar to the input gain meter, you'll notice if it's clipping by a red icon appearing at the top. At the bottom left of the plugin UI, you'll see a tuner. Selecting that brings up the tuner window. We have options to see the tuning value in cents or as hertz. And we can also tune this to a specific frequency if we want. By default, we're set to 440 Hz, but we could type in any value and tune to that as well. At the top right of the tuner window, we have an option to unmute the tuner if you want to hear it as we tune. And at the bottom center of the tuner window, we have an option with a toggle switch to activate a live tuner, which appears at the bottom left of the plugin window. Next to this, on the footer of the plugin, we have the MIDI mappings window. And here you'll see any relevant MIDI mappings that you've assigned to parameters in the plugin. Next to this, we then have the tap icon, where you can tap in a specific BPM for the clock of the plugin. Here you'll see that was 87.2 beats per minute, but you can click that and then type in any value you wish. With the arrows, you can also increase or decrease that by clicking and dragging. Along from that, we then have the metronome, which you can select, and it brings up a whole new screen. Here you've got the volume for the metronome, which you can turn up and down. We have the time signature that the metronome will beat in, as well as a few various options with different subdivisions. The sound of the metronome, and also the panning of the metronome, so you can pan it in the stereo field. Below this, we then have the internal BPM clock of the plugin. As you see, it's set to 151. We can increase this incrementally or decrease it with the arrows, and we can also tap in a BPM as well. We've got the rhythm that the metronome will click to, and the play button. With the icons at the bottom, you can click these and customize the type of beats that the metronome will do. And if I close the window with this X at the top, we have an option to play the metronome with this play icon without having to open the metronome window. Next to this, we then have the audio settings for the plugin, where we can choose the audio device type, the audio input and output device, as well as select our routing with inputs and outputs. On top of that, we've got our sample rate selection, our audio buffer size, and also an option to choose MIDI input devices to use with the plugin as well. When closing that, at the far right at the bottom of this footer, you'll see that we have two arrows where we can select the size of the plugin window. Everything from small, medium, large, extra large to maximum. And that covers it for the global features of the Fortin Nameless Suite X. Now let's take a look at some factory and artist presets in Fortin Nameless Suite X. This preset is by Ola England and it's called I Can't Play That Song. And neither can I. This preset is by Dugout and it's called Rocky McRockface. This preset is by Jens Kidman and it's called Riff 7. This preset is by Matthias Kupianen and it's called Dist 02. This preset is by Timu Mantisari and it's called Dynamic Lead. This preset is by Neural DSP and it's called Classic Rock 02. This preset is by Neural DSP and it's called Metal 01. This preset is binaural DSP and it's called Modern Rock 02. This is a preset binaural DSP and it's called Metal 06 7 strings. This is a preset binaural DSP and it's called Metal 08 8 strings. So let's create a preset using the Fortin Nameless Suite X. What I'm going to go for is a relatively high gain rhythm sound that can double up as a lead sound when using the post effects. Using the default preset, here's how it sounds straight off the bat. I like the character of that, but I want a bit more overdrive. So what I'm going to do is use gain 1 because we're in the high input, and just get a bit more drive from that gain stage. And that feels great, but what I'd like to do is be able to roll the volume back and kind of clean it up a bit if I want. And I'm going to use the pre-effects and the hex drive specifically just to give a bit more level and push into the front end and drive the amp a bit. I might just add a tiny bit of drive on the pedal as well. So that's quite a lot of gain for a rhythm sound, but when using lead kind of lines and single notes, it feels about right because you've got enough sustain there to carry the notes. So I like where the gate is positioned, it's not clamping it too much. Same with the grind, it's giving the aggression for the rhythm sound. Without it, gets a bit messy in the low end. So the grind, just shy of midday like the gate, works perfectly. The tone is kind of working for the hex drive, straight up the middle. In terms of cab stuff, I might use a warmer sound. So I'm going to go for the ribbon 121. I'm going to bypass the 57 for a minute. Yeah, the ribbon's got the most low end and kind of warmth to it. So I'm going to leave that where it is. The 57, let me just solo that. And then blended with the ribbon 160. Feels good. I might actually just bring it out towards the outside the cone and warm it up a bit. And just because we can, let's add a bit of room to both of these, but not too much, kind of down there at about minus 13 dB. Just to put it in a space. And I can hear there's a bit of noise creeping in, so I could use the Zool and choke it a bit more, but I'm just going to use the gate in the plugin as part of the global features, and that might sort it out. That seems to work just fine. So now let's move on to the EQ. I'm just going to give it a bit of a bump in the mids for the lead kind of stuff, and dip 4 and 2K a bit because they can get annoying when using some high gain, especially on a bridge pickup. And using the high pass filter, I'm just going to clean up that ultra low end that can get annoying. So without the EQ, and with, does the trick. Nice bit of corrective EQ. And now on the post effects, I'm going to use both the delay and the reverb, but I'm going to have them quite warm and almost like a cloud underneath everything. I don't want them to be too bright. And thankfully, they both have tone dials. So dialing in the delay first. Sounds very bright. So I'm just going to bring the tone back, not all the way, and also the feedback, because that was going on for quite a while. And that's perfect. The quarter note seems to work absolutely fine at that tempo of around 100 beats per minute. Let's now add the reverb. So with tone at noon, see how that sounds? It's kind of bright. I'm going to bring it back a tiny bit. The decay felt about right. Not too much to kind of get in the way, but not too short to feel lacking and a bit dry. So. If I boost this around midday, it might get a bit too much. Yeah, just a bit less than that should be good. Great, so now I can bypass this entire section by double-clicking the post effects. And I've got a great aggressive rhythm sound there. Maybe if I brought the volume back a bit, that can tighten up, have a bit less drive. Or if I want the kind of full bore aggressive rhythm sound, volume all the way up. And with a quick double click of the post effects, or I could assign this to a MIDI foot switch, I can bring in that delay and reverb for some more ambience, and I've got a lead tone. So really enjoying where that's got so far. I'm going to save my progress by selecting Save As. And now it's going to appear in my user presets. So that wraps up our deep dive into the Fortin Nameless Suite X. It's an absolute monster of a plugin, perfectly capturing the raw aggression and power of Mike Fortin's original amplifier design. If you want to start playing through these incredible metal tones today, head on over to neuraldsp.com to start your free trial. I've been John Connern, thanks for watching.